Hello, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Taglo Gesesa, and I'll be in the background answering any of your technical questions today. Without no further ado, I would like to introduce our hosts, Nina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for an executive briefing on perspectives on public transit after COVID-19. My name is Nina Wittkamp. I'm part of Mckinsey's travel, logistics, and infrastructure practice, and I will be your moderator today. We encourage you to submit questions throughout today's session. In order to do so, you go to the Q&A panel at the lower right side of your screen, type your question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu, and click send. To preserve confidentiality, questions will be read by our team and will not be attributed to you. We expect to receive several questions during the briefing and will do our best to address each of them. As a reminder, if you experience any technical difficulties during our session, please use the Q&A panel to request assistance. And with that, let me hand it over to Karsten to get us started.
Okay, so it's good that I did the mistake at the beginning. Welcome to everyone. So you're free to commit your own mistakes. My name is Carsten Lotz. I'm a partner from Mckinsey's travel, logistics, and infrastructure practice. And I welcome you to this executive briefing from our practice together with our McKinsey Center for the Future of Mobility. Let me briefly introduce you to whom you will see and listen to today. We have Chris from ViaVan, an industry leader of new mobility solutions, and we have Xavier and Eva from Transdev, mobility solution leader also coming from France but present all over the globe. We have from our side Andreas Mertens, who is our solution leader from the McKinsey Center of Future Mobility, and you have myself, as I said, a partner from the TLI practice, working in the industry for more than 10 years now. We're very happy to present you our perspective on, let's say, what's becoming the new normal. So the mobility sector during COVID, after COVID, however you would like to put that. And I'm especially grateful for our two guests sharing their perspectives today. Nina, if you lead us to the next page. Let me, before we dive into the content and I hand over to Chris for the first content section, let me tell you before that we as McKinsey, even though we are a management consultancy and we work with businesses and we have a business angle, we also consider this COVID-19 crisis first and foremost a global humanitarian challenge. So although we talk now about financials, we will talk about customer impressions, we will talk about positioning of the industry, we are very much aware that this touches everyone's lives and livelihoods. And when we work for businesses to help them to get through the crisis, we do this with a very humble attitude that business has a function for society and that we try to help businesses to help society. And this is the angle we should look at it. And I think this is for us as McKinsey very important and also for our guests today. And this should be the background and the underlying theme of what we're discussing today. Having said that, we are convinced that society, but also companies around this world need to act promptly, and they have acted promptly. And this is why many regions of this world are getting out of this crisis. And we hope that all the regions of this world will get out. And we have hoped to contribute a little bit to this, also with the section we have today. And now, let me hand over to Chris from ViaVan, who will give us his perspective and also introduce a little bit what they are doing, much better than I could. Thanks, Chris, for being with us.
Thanks, Karsten, and thanks to the McKinsey team for having me. It's great to be here with you. I'll tell you a little bit about Via and ViaVan to start with. At Via, our mission is to build technology for public transportation, which enables our partners, our public transport partners, to deliver efficient, integrated, and accessible mobility. We're fundamentally here to support the core mission of public transport. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means, but maybe to start, just acknowledge that it's been a very challenging time for anyone who's in mobility, whether that's public transport or the technology behind it, mostly because for the last several months, people have simply been moving around much less. But I think we all understand and believe that public transportation and the technologies that underlie it have a big role to play in enabling an economic recovery and to bring life back to a new normal. Not sure if I can move these slides myself. Looks like I can. Great. So our solutions span the entire spectrum of what we call public mobility. And we don't just think of public transport in terms of buses and trains, but also paratransit, community transport, school buses, corporate and university transport. And we got our start doing what many folks understand as DRT, or on-demand public transport, on-demand shuttles that help to facilitate first and last mile connections to existing transport networks, and also to provide connectivity in urban and rural locations that may not have great connections to public transport already. But we also offer fixed route solutions. We operate and provide technology for paratransit operations. We have quite a number of very interesting school bus solutions. We're working with New York City's Department of Education on the largest smart school bus deployment in the world. And we also, in general, are recognizing, as we discuss with our partners, that they want their transport offerings integrated into a single platform that can provide a much higher quality of service for riders, and in many cases with the benefits of lower operating costs and vastly better data. So that can mean multimodal and intermodal trip planning. It can mean payments. It can, in certain cases, mean an entire mass solution. And over the last 7 years, we've emerged as a leader in this space with a very significant global footprint and a rapidly growing roster of over 100 transit partners. It's actually it's challenging to keep this slide up to date. I think we're actually closer to 150 at this point. And one thing that's kind of interesting about having a global footprint with 300 plus engineers working on these solutions is that it allows us to, on the one hand, take the approach that public transport is always extremely local, but to be able to have the resources to bring a very local, customized, hands-on approach to each of our transit partners. And those partners are among the world's leading transport organizations, whether that's Transport for London or HRT in Helsinki or LA Metro or the BVG in Berlin, or one of the major transport operators that we work with, or very recognizable brands like Google or Mercedes-Benz. So that's just a bit of an introduction to us as a company. I want to talk a little bit about some of the trends that COVID has accelerated. And I think this is one of the key things that the COVID pandemic has done across industries, is accelerating trends and transformations. And this is especially true in transit. I wanted to talk about three that we've seen, and we're using our technology to help our partners transform themselves. So one is resilience and flexibility. The second is economic mobility, and third is essentially operational transformations. So Nina, we can go next. And to first focus on resilience and flexibility, the question is, how do we build in the capacity for our public transport networks to rapidly adapt to shifts, not just in demand, but also core needs? So I want to show you some examples rather than just tell you what I think of things that we've done. So some of you may be familiar with the Barrelkönig, which we launched with the BVG in Berlin in 2018. It grew to be the largest public on-demand transport service in the world, over 150 vehicles, 50% of which were electric vehicles, a ridership of over 100,000 riders per month, fully integrated into Berlin's Mass app, and also fully accessible for riders in wheelchairs. Received the German Federal Inclusion Award, the 2019 Transtech Partnership of the Year, the UITP Transport Strategy Award. So anyway, it's a service I'm very proud of. But when the pandemic struck, we were able to quickly make a number of adjustments which transformed it very quickly. We capped vehicle capacity. We expanded the service area to cover over 3/4 of Berlin's hospitals. And then we also reserved the service for the exclusive use of critical medical workers. So an example of how technology can allow an existing network to quickly change not only where it serves, but who it serves. We can go next. Here's an example from Malta, where we actually offer a nationwide service in partnership with the De Bono Group, an on-demand shared ride service launched in July 2019. And it was launched to combat rising congestion and a lack of alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. It's been a huge hit. And data from the first year of operation suggests that the service alone could reduce traffic in Malta by 15 to 30%. With 47 vehicles during the pandemic, the service was very quickly reconfigured to provide actually grocery deliveries. So reversing the mobility from people moving to stores and having the stores move the goods to people. So there are many, many more examples I could show you, but I think the key point is that when transport networks are technology enabled, they can be rapidly adapted when needs change. Second key theme is economic mobility and equity. I wanted to show you to start with some data from some of our services. So across the last several months, the pandemic, and in the United States in particular, the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement has brought a lot of attention to inequitable structures, including how transportation systems have been designed. And I think there's very little question that low-income individuals rely much more heavily on public transportation than their wealthier counterparts. And so a number of our partners have actually turned to microtransit or on-demand transit, DRT, to improve public transportation specifically for low-income residents. And so recently we took a look back at 3 of our services in the US, in Jersey City, which is adjacent to New York City, LA Metro, Los Angeles, and Arlington, Texas, which is a city of about 500,000 people, to see how the pandemic had affected ridership across economic levels. And what we've actually seen, it might be a little bit hard to see, but the yellow line in these pictures is the lowest income bracket, and then second is the green teal line. What's been interesting to see is that while public transport ridership across the board, and I'm sure many of you can commiserate, has gone down by 80–90%, for the folks in the lowest income brackets, their decline in ridership was much less pronounced. In Los Angeles in particular, we made some changes to enhance mobility for critical workers, which resulted actually in a very surprising outcome, which was a growth in the service to even more than pre-COVID levels, which wildly surpassed our expectations and might mean that it is one of the very few public transport services that actually gained ridership during the COVID crisis. Why is this important? Well, the economic recovery efforts are going to require sufficient mobility, economic mobility, to ensure that the jobs that we create are actually accessible to the people who need to actually do them. We can go next. One more example, which launched last week, actually, again in the United States, in Wilson, North Carolina. And I think the story of Wilson is quite similar to patterns that are playing out across cities and regions all over the world, which is that the center of economic activity has shifted geographically, and along with the travel patterns have shifted, meaning that the fixed route service that has been in use for decades at this point no longer serves the needs of the community. So what the city asked us to do was to launch a service that replaced those fixed routes with an entirely on-demand service. And what this allowed us to do is to create mobility access, and especially for unbanked riders, people without credit cards, and those without smartphones, where we have specific technology solutions to allow those folks to take advantage of this new service. So again, I think the key theme here is that we have a new awareness of the importance of equity and especially transport and economic mobility during the recovery. Now, the last theme that we hear, which is probably the one we hear most frequently from our transit partners, is around cost. With ridership and revenues way down and the recovery expected to take months, if not years, how can we significantly reduce the operating cost of these services without a significant impact to the actual service quality? So I'll show you one example. There are a number that we could go through, but this is from a town called Seven Oaks in England, where we worked with an operator called GoCoach, and they experienced something that I think is fairly typical, a 90% drop in ridership during the COVID crisis. And what we did with them was, within a few weeks, converted 7 of their fixed route bus lines into a completely dynamically routed on-demand service, using the same buses, using the same drivers, so the same fixed assets. We added some hospitals to the zone so that NHS staff could maintain access to those hospitals. the rides cost the same as bus fare. And what they saw on the operational side was a 77% increase in the utilization of the seats on that bus and a 62% reduction in the driver hours. So a very, very large reduction in operating costs, as well as for the riders, a 3x reduction in waiting times. And one of the things that the technology allows us to do is, as demand has picked back up slowly, we've actually started to reintroduce fixed lines. So we're able to flex the way the service is delivered as demand recovers. So hopefully that helps give an idea of how technology can be brought to bear to help address some of the challenges, not only within the COVID moment, but as we start to emerge from it. And I'll pass it along. So thank you for your kind attention. Looking forward to the discussion.
So same mistake here. So then I take it on. Welcome everyone. In the next couple of minutes, I will tell you a bit about our thinking at the Mckinsey Center for Future Mobility and what we believe and model with our mobility market model. So when we talk about mobility and think about what will happen in the next couple of years, we will see quite some disruptive changes. And to navigate this uncertain future, we developed the mobility market model, which covers people mobility in 2,800 cities globally, with covering 10 transportation modes, varying from private over public to shared transport, and also covering various powertrain types. And this model has been used in client studies now for the last 5 years, and over the time in various discussions has been always refined and updated. So let me tell you a bit how we see the future of mobility. So when you want to model 2,800 cities, you face certain challenges when it comes to assumptions and how mobility patterns change. So what we developed is a distinctive city archetype view, as you can see here on this page. So what we did is we selected these cities and grouped them depending on segmentation criteria you see on the left side into these different archetypes. And as you can see, these segmentation criteria are highly region specific. So while, for example, in North America, total population and population growth and modal split of the transportation today is most decisive on how similar transportation patterns are. In Europe, there are additional factors important, like, for example, geographic region. So it makes a lot of difference if you are in Western or Eastern Europe in this case. And then when you take a look at other regions of the world, like, for example, Latin America or South Asia, then income is another quite important factor. So with this grouping into the city archetypes, we have a good basis to understand when mobility changes in one city or a couple of cities within one group, how this will then likely also affect other cities in the same group. Then on the next page, we see the second big element of the model, which is our ability to really vary a lot of input parameters across 3 dimensions. So what you see here is our scenario cube, and it consists out of regulatory, consumer, and tech parameters. The regulatory parameters are there to include changes in policies, like, for example, congestion charges or city center car bans, while consumer acceptance gives us some idea about how consumers will change their behavior away from private vehicles more towards shared modes. And lastly, the tech timeline is an important parameter to, for example, assess how technology advances and when we see autonomous vehicles on the road, which clearly will change how we see mobility today. So with this model, we have quite some good understanding about the macroeconomic and long-term trends. But when you think about more short-term events like COVID, you need additional data sources. So what we did is, and you see that on the next page, couple this model and the knowledge we have already there with more real-time data analysis, in this case, for example, Apple data, to access how short-term trends and short-term events like COVID changes and affect mobility. So on this page, you see, for example, the maximum downturn in vehicle miles traveled in Europe. And that is basically a snapshot on the peak of the crisis. And what is interesting is that you see quite some gradient from the Nordics towards the southern countries, with just just 50% drop in the Nordics and more to 90% drop in the vehicle miles traveled in the southern countries. But that is, although this is quite interesting to see, the more interesting question for us is to get a perspective on how this will recover and how the next normal then will look like. And to get here also more insights, we then additionally performed a consumer survey, as you can see here, in the key markets of Europe, but also globally. And one of the questions we asked the participants is, how do you expect to change your transportation modes when we return to the next normal? And then the answers came a bit surprising. So private car usage, where you could think of as an increase due to some distancing motivations, will not really see a huge change. And this is a common pattern in all markets. Public transport is a bit mixed. So in some markets, you will see a decline or people expect to use it less. But in other markets, they will also see use their transportation mode more. So on average, also not really a big trend. And then when it comes to the next modes, we see some increase. So especially walking and biking with private bikes, we'll see, or the people say that they will see that they use that much more in the future. And also then the next three modes, shared micromobility, car sharing, ride hailing, so what we would summarize under shared mobility, we'll see some slight increase. So while this is already quite some change in the mobility behavior, especially for the shared modes and the private modes, which are not car, on the magnitude scale, this, we believe, will still be rather a small change compared to what we see long-term due to the ACES trends, so autonomous, connectivity, electrification, and shared. And this is what you see on the next page. So this gives you an illustrative overview about how we think about mobility. On the very left side, you see the percentage of total miles traveled in one of the cities under one scenario today across the different modes, from private car to shared micromobility. And then with our modeling, we can investigate in detail how these modes will shift then towards 2030. And as you can see here in this particular example, especially private car will see some drastic changes. But this and how big this change is will heavily depend on where you are, in which city and in which region, and about which scenario we are thinking. So on the next page, you see a comparison of the mode shift in different European cities, comparison 2019 to 2030. And we start with the big Western metropolises, like, for example, London on the left side, and go to rather small urban follower, so meaning more rural areas of Germany on the right side. And London, I will deep dive in a second, but let me already tell you here on this page that today we see quite some focus on two modes, which is private vehicles on the one side and public transport on the other side. And this will get much more heterogeneous in the future. Then when we go to smaller European cities like Berlin, for example, these are already today quite reliant on private vehicles with some degree of public transit, but also in these, you will see quite some shifts towards more shared and more public modes and less car usage. And then when we jump to the very far right of this page, you see that in the rural areas, the transformation of the transportation system will not be very prominent until 2030. So you see quite just very minor changes, and they will stay quite car reliant. So let's take a closer look at London and how this changes from today to the future. Today, as seen on the previous page, we have roughly 50% of the households accessing a car, which leads already today to a lot of pollution and congestions with serious problems for the traffic in the city. But on the other hand, you see quite some good public transport due to some investments in the past. And when we now look towards 2030, you will see that private vehicle usage will be heavily disincentivized with congestion charges and additional taxes. And due to technology advances, we will see the emergence of robo-taxis, which take over also quite some part of the bus ridership. But at the same time, public rail infrastructure will continue to grow and thus will still retain a large share of the passenger miles traveled. Now you might say, okay, this is one scenario. So is it the 1 in a million or is it a general trend? And that is what we investigated, and you can see on the next page, where we compared different scenarios from a low disruption scenario, which we called mobility transition delayed, towards a high disruption scenario, which sees a policy guided shift to pooled AV and transit. And across all these scenarios, what is common is that the private car usage will decline and public transport will increase, but also in the more tech advanced disruption scenarios, policy guided shift to transit and policy guided shift to pooled AV and transit, we will see quite some increase in new modes, meaning robo-taxis. And this will change the mobility behavior in the cities quite profoundly. So in summary, from our perspective, it's not a question if mobility will change, but only how big the change in the end will be. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions.
Hello, everybody. Many thanks to the Mckinsey team to give the floor to Transdev in that particular context. I'm very happy to be with you and to play forehand's presentation with Eva from Sweden.
Yes,
Eva. So we will try to give you a flavor of how the life of a transport operator looks like now. So I will just give a word about who is Transdev. We are an operator and global integrator of mobility. We provide 11 million passenger trips every day. That's huge. We are present in 17 countries, among them 6 large ones. So France, Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, United States, Australia, and New Zealand. And with France representing 40% of our revenues. We operate all modes of transportation. Really all modes, buses, coaches, tramways, metro, rail, ferries, bikes, and probably I forgot some of them. And 90% of our business, you can see on the chart, is done in a B2G environment, meaning that we contract with public transport authorities. And roughly remaining 10% is B2B business. So you can see airport services, tourism, corporate, and school buses. We also invent the mobility of tomorrow. And we strongly believe that mobility of tomorrow will be more personalized, more autonomous, connected, and sustainable. And so we provide mass solution, autonomous system, and transport and demand networks. But this future of mobility is already a reality for us. I would like just to share 3 facts with you. We are very proud to be the first mass mobility as a service player in France. So our first platform is in Mulhouse, and we will launch our second platform in the next 2 weeks in Saint-Étienne, in the center of France. Relatively to on-demand transportation, already 8% of our revenues and activities is related to that segment, and particularly with health, paratransit, and ambulance services. And for autonomous vehicles, beyond all the tests and experimentations, we have developed 2 autonomous laboratories, one in Rouen and one in Satory around Paris, with regular services. So despite this wonderful description of our company, as mentioned before, we are entering, I would say, an uncertain period with the COVID crisis. And with this chart about the ridership evolution in 16 cities in France, as you can see, we are deeply impacted by the lockdown decisions and the lockdown exit paths. During the lockdown periods, we were roughly at 10% in France, 10% of ridership in comparison with similar period in 2019. But as you can see on this chart, it is mentioned minus 95%. That means only 5% of ridership. But these figures are based on validations of passenger and not on real riderships, because a lot of people didn't validate during this period. Entrance to the front of the bus was not allowed. After the lockdown exits, ridership has progressed step by step according to different government measures, and we are currently in French networks of Transdev around a minus 20% average for ridership, with a range from, I would say, minus 40% to 0%, depending on the different cities and area. And we are mostly impacted in Ile-de-France, roughly around minus 40%. Among all the countries within Transdev, we notice different kind of impacts. So we have 2 categories of countries. Most of them were deeply impacted, as it's shown on the left side. So we have France, Netherlands, UK, Germany, and other countries were a bit less impacted, like in Sweden and Czech Republic.
And, oh, sorry, can you go back, Xavier? Just to make a quick comment. I just want to say that in Sweden, we never had a lockdown. Basically, all the time, the public transportation ran at full capacity. But we still, we did always encourage people not to use public transportation, and we still do. So the message is avoid public transportation. So I would say today we are at 65 to 70% of our normal ridership. Next slide, thanks.
Yep.
And so we are definitely losing passengers. We think that we will lose, we're losing them now, and we will lose them for a long term, unfortunately. And during this period, Transdev had done a lot of surveys trying to predict the future. And what is interesting with this image is that we show people that have changed their ways of traveling during the pandemic and find new ways of traveling. And a lot of them now state that they won't come back to public transportation. So for France, we can see it's 17%.
for Sweden, in a survey we did just recently, it's 19% that say we found other modes and won't go back to public transportation. And what they have done instead is that they have used more cars. They have been walking and biking, as we heard before as well. And a big trend is also that people sustain from traveling. And I think this is something that we really need to address and take into account, that people will work more and more from home. And between our surveys in May and September, we see a huge shift. You see going from 37% to 51% that people are saying, yes, I will keep on working more from home even after the pandemic. And this doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing for public transportation, because it can mean that we can cut costs during the very costly peak hours. So it might be something good if people start working a little bit more flexible hours. Yeah, over to you, Xavier.
Yeah, I'm trying to switch. Yeah, that's down. And currently with that survey, we try also to reassess our forecast of ridership. And this is something very crucial in the discussion and negotiation we have with our PTA clients. So in that purpose, we designed different types of model, a bit like presented by Mckinsey before, about the evolution of ridership, and we did that by per customer segment and per trip reason. And we took into account different kind of effects, several drivers such as trip avoidance due to fear, to unemployment evolution, to teleworking. And with all that model, at the end, our guess is we could lose on a regular trend 10 to 15% of ridership in average in our countries. And so it could be less in some countries, like perhaps Sweden, we hope so, and perhaps more in Netherlands, like mentioned. And France, Germany, we are now confident to be between 10 and 50% end of the year if there's no big second wave of the virus. Eva, you would like to comment?
I would just like to say, as long as we encourage people not to travel with public transportation, we will probably see a more pessimistic number for Sweden. But yeah, let's hope it's not too bad.
Let's be positive. Yeah. So after all that analysis and surveys and forecasts, so what can we do in that type of situation for an operator? So we are currently working on 3 types of action. First one, we are intensively working on different levers to make passenger going back in a very short term. So we are designing plans, specific plans for start of school year, and I would say in a wider perspective, some marketing plan to recover passenger in the next month. And we focus a lot on nudge actions, based on behavioral science to create reinsurance among passengers. Something to be commented on this chart, Eva?
Yeah. Well, this percentage you see is from a survey we did in Sweden asking what would it take for you to come back during the pandemic. And the number one thing is like you have to secure there's space enough so we can keep a distance. And secondly, it's about the face mask. We don't have that as mandatory here. But there are also things that we as an operator can do with even more cleaning. We can also work more on tech solutions, as we heard before, with real-time information showing how much people are within the vehicle, and you can make a choice. So there are things to do, definitely.
Second action, we are entering negotiation with our PTAs for our current contracts and also the potential ones, because for some of our contracts, we are in a bidding phase. And the main question for us is which engagement for the ridership if some huge variations arise in the next months. So that's why we are pushing new formulas to rebase our engagement for the reference year, year 0, and then also to modify the path for the year just after. And globally, the idea is to insert more flexibility in our contracts and the different formula. On that chart, particular chart, the reference year, for instance, will be rebased to integrate the -30% gap for the year 0, and then we include a mitigation the factor for the years after. So this is really something we are working in all our contracts in all our countries. And the last actions, finally, we're also pushing other modes, the modes currently promoted, such as bikes and e-bikes, electrical bicycle. And one example is the long-term lease offer we propose in Paris area. So the service is named Veligo. Probably you have heard of it. So we established a partnership with a big postal player, La Poste, and two small companies to propose 20,000 e-bikes in Paris area. So it's, I would say, huge, and the success is confirmed. The first wave of 10,000 is already rented, and now a lot of people are in the waiting lists, and the second wave will be launched. The next wave of 10,000 will be launched in the very next days. As you can see, the fee is very attractive. It's just 40 euro per month, and half of this fee could be also reimbursed for employees. So it's very cheap. Once more, it's a contract with the PTA of Ile-de-France. So it's really in line with our business model. As mentioned, this offer encounters a big success. A key KPI for us is the renewal trend. So 80% of people now are renewing their contracts for a 3 additional months. The limit is next 9 months at the end. And besides the price, one of the key success factors is the high density of delivery points. We have more than 200 with postal agencies, Transdev parkings in Paris area, but also shops of the sports retailer Decathlon. So wherever you are in Paris area, you have one close delivery point. Another success factor is the pure online subscription. So you have no physical meeting to sign the contract and to register, and so the passenger journey is really simplified. Two last facts about this Veligo offer. So 90% of users, of people use them for their home to business trip. And most of our customers used before public transportation. So this is something a bit disappointed for us because the objective to transform, I would say, car lover to bike lover is not there. And so this objective is not yet fulfilled. So as you see, we are hardly pushing to the new normal situation that is sustainable for our passengers, for our planet, for our client PTA, and for Transdev. And as a conclusion, Eva, with me, if I would say jump into and use public transport now.
Thank you.
Okay, then I take over and I try to accelerate a bit, and I'm happy that I can because some of the stuff that I had prepared has already been mentioned. I want to talk a little bit about the structural demand loss and the revenue loss and subsequently the profit loss that we see in the industry. We see 3 phases, and they have been laid out by the other participants of this panel pretty clear. We have an initial effect of the COVID crisis with a demand that was heavily struck, and where we've seen a lot of, basically a standstill of public transport in many countries, with costs continuing to run at almost full levels. and we've seen nations stepping in to cover some of these losses, but also very depending on regional scenarios. Then we now see the effect of restarting countries, and demand is picking up in different kind of granularities. I will come to that in a moment. And we see in the end the structural impact of COVID post-restart. And there, what you see here is the result of one study we were able to do. We too expect demand to come back somewhat to 100% around the year of 25. Always with a hypothesis that we find some kind of vaccine, that we don't see a second lockdown phase in the economies. So given on what we see and what we know today. Before we reach that, we will suffer quite some revenue losses, and the impact on the P&L of operators, however, is quite different. So this is a model of a structural loss that we model for one, let's say, more urban region. And you've seen some figures below from Transdev, where they had for the Netherlands -20%, for Germany, France -10 to 15. From our perspective, this is an important way of looking at things. You need to go granularly into regions. And what we see, let's say, the more high income, the more consulting, banking industry kind of people like we, management people, are in an urban area, the heavier demand is struck. So people working from home are people in management, in consultants, banks, lawyers, let's say professional service industries. They can work from home, they can work remotely, and there you see a heavy struck of demand, which is reflected by some parts of Ile-de-France, like Transdev has been saying, which is reflected in the Netherlands. However, if you look at other areas where you have more blue-collar work, where you have more industry, you see less the effect, which is perfectly in line with what Chris has been telling us, is that low-income people in the United States are picking up public transport much faster and much more than higher-income people, because they typically work in jobs that you cannot do remotely. Synthesis: if you as an operator look at how is my revenue streams, how are my profit streams concerned, and what kind of contract negotiations should I put in place with public transport authorities, you need to take that granular view, and you need to understand what is driving your demand in different cities. So there, the average temperature in this case does not help. Yeah, this is basically what if we now look at what kind of levers do we have to improve the financial position of public transport, there is some stuff that you would expect always from McKinsey, what you can do. And there's some stuff that is COVID specific, and let me maybe highlight those COVID specific levers that we see, and then open up the panel for discussion to allow us all to get some some more interaction. So the COVID specific levers, the first, and we've seen that from Transdev, is safe service and operations, and to reassure your passengers that you have safe service and operations. So it's even more important than before to also hold the cleanliness of transport in these times. The second one is government stimulus and contract negotiation. We've seen, especially in Europe, a huge stimulus package, much of it oriented towards the future. We also had some immediate recovery regimes. The interesting thing is, how can you profit for the phase in between from the stimulus package, which at the moment, from our perspective, is not quite as covered as had been covered the immediate phase, and as is covered a bit more the outreach, let's say 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So this is still open for discussion. There's some stuff going on. It's not clear, and I think this is one major topic for the industry. Scheduling reduction and also flexibilization, what we've seen as an example from Chris's presentation, gives you quite some opportunities. This you need to do in line with the contract authorities, of course. You cannot do it by yourself. And then the last thing, capital productivity and capital optimization. In COVID-specific terms, probably rethink what kind of stuff can you order, what can you postpone in terms of orders, but also where can you profit from stimulus programs for your capital optimization now. I think these are the levers that we see COVID specific and that we would recommend to investigate further, apart from all the typical cost savings and pricing levers that we have in the industry and that you're probably aware of. Let me close it here, said that we have still some time, and hand over to Nina for the discussion now. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Carsten. We will now turn to questions from participants. As a reminder, to ask a question, you go to the Q&A panel at the lower right-hand side of your screen. Type the question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu, and then click send. If you do not see the Q&A panel, select the circle at the bottom of your screen with the 3 dots and select Q&A. And with that, we have a couple of questions coming in. I will pass on the first question to Chris. Chris, given the social distancing is in place, how has that impacted ViaVan's unit economics, and what have you done to offset that?
Sure. So our primary business model is actually software subscription. So we work with partners, and the way we do that is we provide a technology platform that they use in the vast majority of cases as part of their own operations with their vehicles and their drivers. So, in a sense, the challenges around social distancing haven't impacted those unit economics. We do operate a small number of services, and there, obviously it's been a challenge, and we've taken a number of approaches to try to make the services as safe as possible. One is, of course, reducing capacity, installing plastic panels, providing personal protective equipment in the vehicles, even having in-app wellness checks before you board. So certainly it's been a challenge in those specific circumstances, but I think really it's our partners, unit economics, that have suffered the most. And so we've tried to support them as much as possible in as Carsten was saying, flexibilizing their networks in order to kind of reduce the impact on their bottom line.
Thank you, Chris. And I think the next question is for Andreas, and I think Xavier and Eva, you can also comment on this. It's about modal split. Do we have any data which maps out the split between car versus bus versus cycling or walking across infrastructure, across cities? It would be interesting to see which cities are taking the right steps to accommodate and whether the steps are paying off.
Yeah, very interesting question. So regarding the modal split, we definitely have this data, and we also model this across all the cities. When we then take a deep dive on the infrastructure, we did some projects with some cities where we took a deeper look into that, and then really on a city level, on a street level, could analyze how the mobility will change, how changes the city's plan to enact will basically affect the mobility patterns, and then also addressing the question if there might be even more optimal ways to influence the traffic infrastructure. So that is definitely possible, and we did this multiple times, although we don't have this readily available on scale for all the cities where we have the mode share.
Great. Xavier, Eva, is there anything you'd like to add or comment on from your experience in Sweden and other countries? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I did it. Yes, I would say at least in France, we are not tracking infrastructure data. We are more focusing just on, as mentioned, ridership. And for us, our big focus is more to better understand the origin and destination of people. And this is the huge battle of data we are facing now with all the other operators. So more on this origin destination topic than infrastructure model shifts. Eva, in Sweden?
No, I agree with you. It's the same. So.
Perfect. Thank you. Maybe next question for you, Karsten. What is your view on how elastic the demand really is? How quickly does it come back when travel restrictions get lifted? And how much might be structurally gone?
That's a tough one. I think we will see. There's an analysis from the World Tourism Association how fast demand came back depending on different scenarios. And there is those have been regional scenarios. And after the last pandemic in the Asia, so the 8 years back, it took 12 to 18 months until demand was completely back. So on pre-crisis levels, that basically means you have a 5% loss because you're basically seeing a 2% growth each year since, I don't know, 30 years. And we won't make up this period of lost growth. Yeah, so we're always talking now of coming back to pre-crisis level. So at the moment, 5 years until we come back to pre-crisis level, and then we start growing again. Why is that? I think we will see some kind of activities gone that we've become used to. So people coming every day to the office, this will change. On the other side, we will discover new necessities to travel. We will see a growing economy, and that is picking up. Yeah. But so summing up, what is structurally gone? I think structurally gone is the white-collar professional service people going each morning to work and returning each evening home. This is structurally gone, and there we will see some reduction. Structurally not gone is all the kind of blue-collar service people who need to be on their workplace.
Thank you, Karsten. I have one last great question to summarize and would like to ask this to our guest speakers, Xavier Never, and then Chris, maybe for you to comment. What are the opportunities that have materialized during the crisis that public transportation should pursue?
Eva, would like to begin with?
That's a huge question, I would say. That's a huge question. But I think what we can see right now is that we need to be more flexible in our payment models. This is one thing that people don't need the monthly cards as I think it's more or less commonly. So we need to find a bigger flexibility and find more technical solutions that can help us with that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. What is striking is acceleration of the digital transformation of our industry. As mentioned, the payment, but as mentioned before, the understanding of the passenger behavior. We put a lot of sensors. We use camera. We analyze data. So we did, in a very short term period, a big step in terms of digital transformation.
Maybe two quick comments, if that's okay. Well, one, I think, is that traditionally, and this may be true more in the US than in Europe, but I think it is broadly true, network redesign, network reorientation is very, very painful and happens very, very infrequently. And so there's an opportunity now when fewer people are moving around to actually realign networks to actual demand. And connected to that, and building on what Javier just said, there's this there's this moment now where we can really accelerate the move to digitalization, which basically creating a digital infrastructure that sits on top of the buses and the trains that allows you to be more flexible and frankly more resilient, and as well as to have the data that lets you make better decisions going forward. So.
Great, thank you, Chris. And I think with that, right at the hour, thank you very much for everyone for joining the session today. We hope you found it very informative and useful. Appreciate if you could share your feedback via the 1-minute survey that pops up when you close the event. And with that, thank you again, stay well, and have a wonderful rest of the day.